He didn't even look up when he said it, just tapped his tablet and told me my compensation was misaligned with market reality. 15 years of building their entire logistics system, and I was reduced to a cost line. I didn't argue. I just walked out with my access badge still warm in my hand. What he didn't know was that I'd already started building something they'd never control again. If you've ever watched loyalty get punished, stay with me. And subscribe or comment if you've lived through your own version of this. He said it like a weather report, flat, inevitable. Your position's been reviewed under the new cost model. We're aligning compensation across regions. Aligning, that's what he called it. I watched his eyes stay glued to the screen, waiting for me to nod, waiting for compliance. I'd seen people nod in that room before. People who'd given everything, who thought loyalty meant something. I didn't nod. I just let the silence grow heavy enough that even his confidence began to shrink beneath it. Marcus Trent, newly installed COO, dressed like precision itself, was the kind of executive who treated human effort like a variable in a spreadsheet. He'd been brought in by Apex Distribution after the merger, all smooth metrics and optimization frameworks. He didn't understand that Meridian Freight wasn't just data. It was decades of relationships, the pulse of movement that only people could keep steady. When I finally spoke, it was measured. "You're cutting my pay by 35%? He corrected me like a teacher. "Adjusting, streamlining, you'll still be compensated well above the industry median." I almost laughed at that, industry median. For 15 years, I'd built the system that predicted freight routes faster than the government's own logistics model, but apparently, I was now just a costly anomaly. I thought about the nights I'd stayed to repair broken data chains so shipments could leave on time, the weekends spent training new analysts, the years it took to make the impossible reliable. None of it existed in his model. He looked up once, just to say, "These changes take effect next pay cycle." Then back to the screen. That was it. 15 years compressed into one polite dismissal. I thanked him, because that's what professionals do when they're erased, and I left without looking back. Outside, Seattle's air felt like static, cold, electric, heavy with rain. My reflection in the glass doors looked calm, but inside something had hardened. I passed coworkers avoiding eye contact, the kind of silence that spreads when fear replaces trust. In the elevator, I exhaled for the first time. It wasn't anger that filled me, it was clarity. They'd spent months treating experience like inefficiency, replacing judgment with algorithms and calling it progress. Marcus wasn't the villain. He was just the face of a machine that confused data with wisdom. I could have fought for my role, but I didn't want to fight to stay in a place that no longer respected what built it. My badge clicked as I dropped it in the return tray at security. It sounded final. Outside, rain misted the sidewalk as if the city itself was indifferent to my departure. I knew the script. Most people left quietly, updated their resumes, found new jobs, and tried to forget. But as I walked to my car, one thought cut through the noise. They'd underestimated what they'd just let go. I didn't go back. I went in a different direction. Before Marcus arrived with his polished spreadsheets and buzzwords, Meridian Freight systems had been built on intuition, human timing, not just algorithms. Back then, Ellen Shaw was still CTO, a woman who believed in patterns you could feel before you could prove them. She hired me fresh out of graduate school when I was just another data scientist trying to make sense of chaos. Logistics, she told me, isn't about packages. It's about promises. I never forgot that. Over the years, I built the predictive freight routing system that carried the company's growth. I designed it so no shipment would ever sit idle in a terminal because of one broken data point. I mapped delays down to the hour, creating models so accurate that Meridian's clients called it the machine with a heartbeat. When we landed the 5-year contract with the Federal Supply Division, it was my system that made it possible. They called it Meridian Net. I called it sleepless nights and stubborn faith. But I wasn't the kind of person who campaigned for credit. I liked the quiet victories, the steady stream of shipments moving exactly when and where they should. That was before the buyout. Apex Distribution had money, reputation, and a corporate vision that made everyone at Meridian nervous. "It's a partnership," the CEO said at the all-hands meeting, but I could already feel the shift. The conversations changed from service metrics to cost metrics, from reliability to efficiency scaling. Soon, Ellen retired. The new leadership called her legacy talent, like she was a nice antique piece that no longer fit the furniture. After she left, they began auditing every department. They didn't look at what worked. They looked for what they could cut. When they reviewed my division, they called it overbuilt. My models were described as too individualized, not replicable for automation. Translation, too dependent on human oversight. I kept my tone professional during those meetings, but I saw the writing on the wall. They didn't want architects anymore. They wanted operators. When the first layoffs came, I stayed late helping the ones leaving pack their desks. That night, I walked past the data floor, all blue lights and silent screens, and realized how fragile the illusion of permanence really was. Every line of code I'd written, every improvement logged in the system was still running perfectly. But the people who built it were already being erased from its story. It hit me that they could strip away names, roles, even departments, but not the understanding that made it all possible. That was the part they couldn't automate. I remembered what Ellen used to say whenever someone tried to shortcut the system. If you don't understand the pattern, you don't deserve the result. Marcus didn't understand the pattern. None of them did. They saw the output but not the architecture, the efficiency but not the empathy that made it work. And that was their blind spot. The irony was that I had once documented everything meticulously. Version histories, compliance models, algorithm chains, all stored in repositories with my original digital signature. They wanted to erase me, but my name was embedded in the framework itself, not for vanity, but because ownership was traceable, verifiable, permanent. That realization wasn't comforting, it was catalytic. For the first time, I saw a path that didn't involve staying or fighting. It involved rebuilding, somewhere new, with people who still understood that systems are only as good as the minds behind them. The week after I walked out of Meridian, I spent my mornings at a small cafe on the edge of Lake Union, staring at the city skyline that used to define my life. The rain would hit the windows in thin diagonal lines, and I'd watch the ferries drift past like clockwork, everything still moving while my world had come to a full stop. I wasn't angry anymore, just hollow. But silence doesn't stay empty for long. 3 days into that strange limbo, my inbox lit up with a name I hadn't seen in years, Riley Tran. We'd met a decade earlier at a logistics conference when she was running data operations for a much smaller company called NovaLink. Back then, they were the underdogs, creative but underfunded, dismissed by the big players. Her message was simple. Heard what happened? You okay? Also, coffee. I said yes before I knew why. We met at a quiet spot near the docks, and the moment she sat down, I remembered why she'd always stood out. No corporate polish, no jargon, just sharp eyes that missed nothing. "Apex hit you too, huh?" she said, sipping her espresso like it was fuel. I nodded. "They're dismantling everything Meridian stood for." She smiled faintly. "That's what they do. But there's a gap they can't see yet. Mid-tier freight optimization. They're too focused on enterprise clients to notice the smaller supply networks falling apart." She paused, studying my reaction. "I think we could fill it." I leaned back, cautious. "We?" "NovaLink," she said. "We're rebuilding our predictive platform. We need someone who understands real data logic, not those dashboard-driven automations they all worship. We can't pay like the giants, but we can give you ownership, real ownership." The word landed like a spark in dry grass. Ownership. It had been years since anyone said that to me without fine print attached. "You want me to help build your system?" I asked. "Not help," she corrected. "Architect it. You've already done it once. Do it again, but this time for people who listen." She left the offer on the table and walked away, letting me sit with it. I watched her disappear into the crowd and realized I wasn't thinking about salary or titles. I was thinking about freedom. That night, I went home and opened an old folder labeled Legacy Models Archive. Inside were files I'd written long before the acquisition, pure logic, elegant and efficient. It wasn't the Meridian system, but it was the DNA that would later become it. All legally mine. I ran the first simulation in years, and when the algorithm mapped the routes across the Pacific Northwest flawlessly, something shifted inside me. It wasn't nostalgia. It was potential. By the end of the week, I was in NovaLink's modest office, tucked inside a converted warehouse overlooking the water. There were only 12 people, half of them engineers, all of them exhausted but alive in a way I hadn't seen in corporate halls for years. Riley introduced me as our new architect. The room erupted in quiet applause. "We're not building a copy of Meridian," I told them. "We're building what it should have become." The energy was immediate, electric. We worked late that night mapping the architecture on a whiteboard that still had scribbles from old projects. As I drew, I felt the same clarity I'd had in my early years, the kind that comes when you're building something that matters. This wasn't revenge yet, it was recovery. But deep down, I knew the lines between those two words were already starting to blur. The first week at NovaLink felt like a detox. There were no PowerPoints, no performance recalibrations, no executives pretending to be visionaries, just code, logistics maps, and a dozen people who genuinely cared if the system worked. Riley gave me complete freedom. "Whatever you need," she said. That kind of trust was unnerving at first. I'd spent so many years asking permission that autonomy felt dangerous. But by the second week, my instincts returned like muscle memory. I started with architecture, the bones of our new model. Meridian's system had been fast but rigid. What we were building at NovaLink needed to be adaptive, capable of predicting not just routes but human behavior. Driver fatigue, port delays, seasonal shifts, even weather patterns. I called it ARIAN, Adaptive Routing Intelligence for Operational Networks. The irony wasn't lost on me. It sounded almost mythic. We worked in silence most nights, the hum of the servers like a heartbeat under fluorescent lights. I'd stand in front of the whiteboard covered in red and blue markers, trying to solve for problems that hadn't even occurred. Yet, every now and then, Riley would walk in, hand me a coffee, and say, "You're scaring the interns with how quiet you are." I'd smirk, then go back to the numbers. What she didn't know was that I was embedding something into the framework, an invisible structure that would protect our intellectual property no matter who tried to replicate it. It wasn't illegal, just smart. I'd learned the hard way that the world doesn't reward purity. It rewards preparation. The deeper we built, the more the pattern of corporate blindness became obvious. Apex had gutted Meridian's system, replacing predictive models with outsourced data blocks. I knew because every week recruiters from Apex sent consulting opportunities to my inbox, probably unaware that I was reading their job specs like reconnaissance reports. They were desperate, scrambling to rebuild what they'd broken, and in their arrogance, they kept using snippets of the code I'd written years earlier, without realizing that I recognized every variable. That gave me an idea. If Arion could read competitor data publicly available through the industry's testing APIs, it could learn their inefficiencies in real time. Not spy, just observe, legally. Within a month, Arion could detect Apex's supply lag before their clients even noticed. We quietly ran simulations comparing both systems. Ours predicted delivery times 28% faster and fuel costs 17% lower. The team erupted in celebration, but I didn't. I'd seen numbers like that before. The real test wasn't performance. It was scale. Riley knew it too. "There's a regional government bid coming up," she said one night, eyes tired but hopeful. Apex is the favorite. They've had that contract for 12 years, but the specs just went public. If we move fast, we can challenge them. I stared at the bid sheet. The project was massive. Multi-state logistics infrastructure with federal oversight, the kind of deal that defined reputations. "We're not ready," I said, though part of me knew that wasn't true. We were ready. I just didn't want to admit how much I wanted it. "You know their system better than anyone," Riley said quietly. "You built half of it." I looked at the map on the wall, where our routes overlapped Apex in red lines. They were slow, bureaucratic, and dependent on the same outdated models they'd stripped from Meridian. I exhaled slowly. Then we'll show them what innovation actually looks like. That night, I stayed until dawn finalizing Aerion's optimization engine. Every variable I coded carried a shadow of the past. Every safeguard, every check, every built-in resilience designed to prove a point. Not to hurt them, but to remind them who had built their success. When the sun came up, the city below was wrapped in fog, the streets glistening. I saved the final version and renamed the file Aerion Release Candidate 1. For the first time in months, I felt peace. But it wasn't calm. It was focus. Revenge didn't have to be loud. It just had to be precise. The invitation arrived 2 weeks later, embossed and confident. Apex Distribution and NovaLink Logistics were shortlisted for the Regional Transportation Overhaul, final pitch to be held in the Seattle Convention Center, live before the Department of Infrastructure panel. It was the kind of event Apex treated like theater. Executives rehearsed charm, engineers rehearsed silence, and Marcus Trent rehearsed victory. I hadn't seen his name in months, but there it was on the docket beside Chief Operations Officer. The irony almost made me laugh. He had no idea who was about to walk on that same stage. In the days leading up to the presentation, our team turned NovaLink's office into a war room. Screens covered every surface, data streams flickered in real time, and Aerion ran simulations faster than we could analyze them. Riley handled the narrative. I handled the system. We had to prove that our model could manage thousands of concurrent routes without delay or failure. Apex had power, influence, and reputation, but we had agility and a system that actually learned. The night before the pitch, I barely slept. I lay awake watching the rain streak down my window, thinking about the years I'd given to Meridian, the way they dismissed experience as inefficiency. Tomorrow wasn't just a business pitch, it was a mirror. I wanted them to see what they'd thrown away. The morning of the event, the convention center buzzed with the kind of corporate choreography I'd almost forgotten. Perfect smiles, over-polished shoes, the smell of ambition mixed with coffee. NovaLink's setup was modest. 2 projectors, 3 laptops, 1 prototype screen. Across the hall, Apex had a whole stage crew setting up animated backdrops and synchronized lighting. Marcus moved through the crowd like a politician, shaking hands, laughing too loud, every gesture rehearsed. When our eyes met briefly across the floor, I saw no recognition. That was fine. The reveal would come later. When it was our turn to present, Riley introduced us with calm precision. "We're a small firm," she began, "but innovation isn't about size. It's about speed, ethics, and design." Then she handed the mic to me. I walked to the center, feeling every eye follow. "Good morning," I said evenly. "I'm Janet Rowe, system architect for NovaLink's Aerion platform." A small murmur rippled through a few attendees. The name meant something in logistics circles. "Today, we're not just showing you software," I continued. "We're showing you a system that anticipates change, not reacts to it." Behind me, the simulation began. Aerion's interface displayed a network of routes across the Pacific Northwest, thousands of nodes adjusting in real time as parameters shifted. Storm fronts, driver delays, inventory surges, all recalculated instantly with zero. Downtime. Gasps cut through the room as the metrics stabilized faster than any competitor model on record. What you're watching, I said, is predictive logic refined through pattern recognition, ethical data modeling, and transparent compliance. No marketing fluff, just truth. Across the aisle, I caught Marcus whispering to his team, checking his tablet, frowning. Then came his turn. Apex's demo was sleek, confident, familiar. The same metrics they'd used for years, now dressed in new colors. Their slides claimed 97% accuracy. But when they switched to live simulation, the delay began almost immediately. Their predictive API lagged, routes stalled, and the display froze for several seconds too long. Marcus tried to keep smiling, but the panel noticed. Everyone noticed. I didn't move, didn't smirk, didn't need to. I just watched the numbers fail to converge, the same way they had when he started cutting costs, stripping teams, ignoring the architecture that held everything together. He recovered with a polished speech about scalability, but the data had already betrayed him. When the session ended, the judges asked both companies to submit follow-up compliance data for verification. That's when the final twist landed. NovaLink's Arion was fully open for audit. Apex's system required internal credentials that they couldn't produce on site. They hadn't expected scrutiny. They'd relied on reputation. As we packed up, I saw Marcus approach Riley, all smiles again. "Impressive presentation," he said, extending a hand, eyes flicking toward me. "Your architect's sharp." Riley just nodded. "She built what your company tried to imitate." For a moment, something flickered across his face. Recognition, disbelief, maybe both. "Janet," he said finally. I met his gaze, calm and steady. "We've met," I said. "You called my value misaligned with market reality. I just recalibrated it." He opened his mouth, but I was already walking away. Outside, the rain had stopped, and the city felt lighter, like something had shifted. The next morning, NovaLink's inbox flooded. Contract awarded, unanimous vote. Apex had been disqualified for non-compliance. Within hours, industry boards lit up with the story. Small firm outperforms Apex with new adaptive AI system. Marcus's quote from the day of my pay cut echoed in my mind. "It's just business." I smiled, closing my laptop. So was this. The week after the pitch, my inbox turned into a graveyard of half apologies and awkward overtures. The first message came from Apex's HR director, a polite note congratulating NovaLink on the successful demonstration, followed by a request for a casual discussion regarding mutual opportunities. I deleted it without opening. Then came Marcus. His email was short, written in the same corporate tone he'd used the day he cut my salary. "Impressive showing at the conference. I'd like to meet. There's a potential advisory role we could offer." It was almost funny how fast arrogance could turn into outreach. I stared at his name on the screen for a full minute before dragging the email to archive. No response necessary. He wasn't reaching out to me. He was reaching for control. That's what people like him did when they realized they'd underestimated someone they couldn't replace. By midweek, the calls started. Unrecognized numbers, voicemails filled with careful words like collaboration, mutual respect, and alignment. The same vocabulary they'd used to justify every layoff, every devaluation, every extraction of loyalty for profit. I turned off my phone entirely. Silence became my statement. I didn't need to gloat, didn't need revenge monologues or press quotes. The data spoke louder than I ever could. Arion was now the benchmark system across the regional freight network, and NovaLink's name was attached to every success report. Apex's shares dropped 7% within 2 weeks. Inside the industry, that kind of hit didn't ruin a company, but it branded them with failure. A quiet one, the kind that lingers in investor memory. I caught sight of Marcus once more on a televised panel about the future of automation. His answers were scripted, eyes tired. He blamed transition friction and market volatility. Not once did he mention innovation or people. He'd learned nothing. I closed the browser. In that moment, I realized revenge didn't always feel like triumph. Sometimes it felt like distance, clean, absolute, irreversible. I logged into LinkedIn one last time, changed my status to Independent Systems Architect, then switched the account to private. No announcement, no post, just silence. The kind that only those who'd once tried to silence you truly understand. A month after the contract win, I drove north to Whidbey Island to visit Ellen Shaw. Her cabin overlooked the gray expanse of Puget Sound, quiet except for the rhythmic hum of the ferry far below. She opened the door before I could knock, smiling like she'd been expecting me. "You did it," she said simply, handing me a mug of black coffee. I laughed softly. "You heard." "Everyone heard," she replied, settling into her chair. "You built something clean, something real. That's rarer than people realize." We sat in silence for a while, the kind of silence that comes only after long noise. I told her about Arian, about the team, about the quiet satisfaction of watching things function as they should. She listened the way she always had, without interruption, without judgment. "You didn't burn it down," she said finally. "You built past it." I thought about that. For months, I'd framed everything as retaliation, a counterweight to injustice. But looking out at the gray horizon, I realized she was right. The real victory wasn't in proving them wrong. It was in proving the work could survive without them. Meridian, Apex, Marcus, they were all footnotes now. The system they'd dismissed as too human had evolved beyond them, beyond me, into something sustainable. Ellen raised her cup in a small toast. "They tried to cut you out of the algorithm," she said. "Turns out, you were the algorithm." I smiled because it wasn't revenge anymore. It was release. I'd stopped looking back. I was already building what came next. If you're still here, you're one of the few who understands what this story was really about. It was never just about a pay cut or a promotion that never came. It was about being told you're replaceable when you know, deep down, you built the very thing they're standing on. Maybe you've been there too, watching someone less capable rewrite your work, smile for credit and call it progress. If so, you already know how it feels to stay silent, to plan quietly, and to walk away without explaining. That's not weakness. That's strategy. I didn't destroy them, I outgrew them, and maybe that's the message someone out there needs today. Your value doesn't disappear because they refuse to see it. Build something better. Build it so well they can't copy it, and when they finally realize what they lost, you won't need to say a word. You'll already be too far ahead. If you've ever had to outsmart a system that tried to erase you, tell me your story in the comments. I want to hear how you turned loss into leverage. And if you felt that moment of quiet power, I'd be honored if you subscribed. Looking back, I've realized revenge doesn't always come wrapped in fire. Sometimes it's quiet, measured, and delivered through the simple act of moving forward. What happened to me wasn't unique. Corporate America is full of polished people who treat experience like a liability and empathy like inefficiency. They forget that data doesn't move without human insight, and systems don't evolve without the minds that built them. The real victory wasn't watching Apex stumble. It was finding peace in knowing I didn't need to destroy them to win. They unraveled on their own once integrity left the room. I used to think forgiveness meant letting someone off the hook, but now I know it's more complex. Sometimes forgiveness is self-liberation, an act of reclaiming energy that's been spent fighting walls that won't move. But sometimes silence is the sharpest knife. It forces reflection. It makes the arrogant hear their own echo. In life, you don't always have to shout to make your point. You just have to keep building, keep growing, until the noise behind you fades into irrelevance. How to get started today. Write down one place in your life where you feel unseen. Don't react to it. Redirect it. Use that energy to start something that's yours, even if it's small. A project, a certification, a skill, a boundary. Remind yourself that walking away doesn't mean losing. It means recalibrating. The system that undervalues you doesn't deserve your blueprint. You do. So build again, differently this time. And when the day comes that they finally notice, let silence do the talking. If this story hits somewhere deep, if you've ever been underestimated, replaced, or erased, leave a comment below. Share your own story. And if you want to hear more about turning betrayal into direction, subscribe and stay with me.